For the first time in 2 years since the start of the Tigrayan crisis in northern Ethiopia, the Ethiopian government has visited the war-torn region. On Monday, a delegation traveled to oversee the implementation of last month's peace agreement with its leader Tajas Chafo, who is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. For one of those rare moments, Getachew Reda, spokesperson for the Tigray Liberation People's Front, the TPLF, praised the visit and the measures put in place to end the war in this region. Of course, internet communication has been restored in the region, with Ethiopian Airlines recently resuming flights to the region for the first time in 18 months, as well as humanitarian aid has been granted access. One could say that there is light at the end of the tunnel for the people of Tigray, but what does this mean for the people of that region and the Ethiopia as a whole, and what future for the East African nation? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Points. Hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you immensely for joining us on your Pan-African channel FOWORA Media Africa, and this is Talking Points, where we get to discuss matters pertaining or matters affecting the African continent. And today we're discussing Ethiopia in East Africa, where the Ethiopian government on Monday dispatched a delegation to the war-torn region to see about how they could oversee the implementation of the peace agreement that was signed in Nairobi last month. And of course, this delegation carried high-profile personalities pertaining to the Ethiopian government to see how they could guarantee, of course, the peace process which the people of Tigray in 2 years have been longing for. And of course, as guest this afternoon, I have Mr. SHITTU, who is a digital news editor, joined us all the way from Lagos, Nigeria. We shall be welcoming him subsequently in the course of this edition. In the meantime, we equally have Mr. ABBEYTAKOR ATONG, who is a global youth leader as well as a medic and an STG coordinator. Good day to you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. SHITTU, you're welcome on board.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, before we proceed...
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you. Before we proceed to today's topic of discussion, ladies and gentlemen, and of course the gentlemen who are with me this afternoon, I'll beckon on you to listen to this report compiled by the news desk of FOWORA Media Africa. We'll be right back. A delegation from Ethiopia's federal government visited the capital of war-torn Tigray region on Monday to oversee the implementation of last month's peace agreements. The information was passed by the government's communication service and the region's ruling party. This is the first high-level federal delegation to travel to Tigray in 2 years, the government said, and Tajas Chafo, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, led the delegation. Getachew Reda, spokesperson for the Tigray People's Liberation Front acronym TPLF, said the visit, which included ministers and heads of public enterprises such as the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, Ethiopian Airlines and Ethio Telecom, was a milestone in the peace agreements. The government's gesture to greenlight the long-overdue restoration of services is commendable, Getachew wrote on Twitter. Let's recall that the federal government and Tigrayan forces signed an agreement to permanently cease hostilities on November 2, 2022, after 2 years of fighting that killed thousands and displaced millions. Ladies and gentlemen, having listened to that report on Ethiopia, of course, is what noting that Ethiopia, the northern region of Ethiopia, has been in crisis for 2 years now, and of course, the government, as well as members of the TIGRAY People Liberation Front, haven't put in place measures, reasons why leaders gathered together in Nairobi to see how they could bring about peace in this East African nation, which is very important not just to Ethiopia but important as well to Africa as a continent. And today, the first question I'll be directing is to you, SHITTU, which joined us all the way from Lagos. What analysis can you make of this move made by the officials of the Ethiopian government towards this peace process which they have been longing for?
It's a thing of joy that finally the warring sides in the Ethiopian Tigrayan crisis have agreed to shift the sword, allow peace to reign, in order to, to ensure a humanitarian disaster does not worsen. Already you have a country that is witnessing a lot in terms of climate change, upset from climate change. You already have a shortage in food supply. It has impacted agriculture. And so when the announcement about the resolution of both sides came, it was with a sense of joy and relief that we've finally been able to overlook the many differences and realize that humanity first, life is precious, and then both sides have agreed. And it's a thing of joy that in the past few weeks, we have seen the resumption of activities like, aviation activities, commercial activities, movement of aid and food and water supply and drugs, to people who need it. I mean, on a general level, it has lifted our hearts as Africans that finally people in Tigray can, begin to look towards a positive outlook to life. No matter how long, battles are drawn, it's always, joy is always better than war.
Exactly. No matter how much the fight, peace shall always be the way forward for every African nation. And now I'll direct this question equally to you, Mr. Atong. What analysis can you make, and do you think that this peace process in Ethiopia is headed towards the right direction, given that the head of the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, acronym TPLF, applauded this move made by the government?
Thank you so much, Ms. Sharon, for this amazing question. Yes, the action towards peace is really very vital and timely, especially at this time for Africans, because it liberates them towards economic development and also enhances growth in all aspects. Because you agree with me that when there is war, when there is fighting, when there are a lot of differences, progress is limited. And so I think it's very, very important, especially for young people, because in all my discussions, I always represent the voice of young people. For young people, it's very important because by reinstating peace, it's very easy for young people to advance in their various aspects and even in education. So I think it's the Ethiopian government's on the right track in enhancing peace with the Tigray people.
Okay, thank you immensely for that timely and of course elaborate contribution. Over to you, SHITTU, who's joining us all the way from Nigeria. The Nairobi Agreement that was signed last month on the implementation of the peace accord highlighted that there should be handover of heavy weapons and of course the withdrawal of foreign as well as non-federal forces. Do you see this method or this move or agreement signed in Nairobi as feasible when it comes to implementing the peace process?
For me, I think it's very cardinal for peace building to hold. You only need, every country has one army. That army must be answerable to the head of state. In the chain of command or in the line of command, the president should be able to deploy, troops, in a certain way. Therefore, if you have any set of people, be it insurgents, be it armed groups, be it resistant groups, be it groups that disagree with the government, there can't be peace when they take instructions from two different persons. Meaning, interests may contradict, national policies may contradict, the direction of the government may contradict, essentially because instructions are taken from, more than one person. So I think it's in order that they had to lay down their arms in order to, allow peace to reign. Because if you are still holding on to your arms, it is because you are suspicious of the government. It's because you do not trust the process. It's because you feel that, in spite of all assurances, that your life is still at risk. And again, we expect, and then we've seen it also, that the Ethiopian government so far respects, the agreements they have had, with the TPLF, and we've not seen anything out of the ordinary in the past few months. So for us, it's a right step in the right direction, and it's an improvement from what existed in the past. My joy particularly was the record time with which the agreements were reached, in spite of the fundamental crisis, the fundamental issues that the crisis intend to talk about, highlight. Yes, essentially.
Exactly. That is what the people of Tigray are actually expecting for. Over to you, Mr. ABBEYTAKOR. Do you share the same opinion as your co-panelist, Mr. SHITTU FOWORA?
So I do share the same opinion with my co-panelist, Mr. Ahmed. Given what he said is very, very important for peace to reign, because like I said earlier, peace leads to a lot of economic development, a lot of personal development, and a lot of advancement in various areas. And if the government has taken this initiative to reinstate peace, then it therefore is a plus to and an example that has been given to most of our African head of states and other African countries to follow. Because with this peace, it's very easy for a lot of development to take place.
Exactly. Now I would like to stay with you and ask you a question. Given you are a global youth leader, could you rate the system of governance in Ethiopia?
Okay, I would say the system of government in Ethiopia is really exceptional and also transformational, because change really comes at this point in time when there is a lot of stiff opposition and a lot of persons are holding on to personal grudges and political grudges. Many people don't want to let go of various differences, but the government of Ethiopia has demonstrated not just transformational leadership, which leads to development, but has also demonstrated that leadership without peace is nothing. I still repeat again, leadership without peace is nothing. You need an atmosphere of peace to implement any leadership action. And with this particular action taken by the government, it has made it possible for inter-trade to take place. It has made it possible for a lot of persons to get in touch with many opportunities, because the war already creates a barrier. It already creates a barrier economically, politically, to exclude both parties from enjoying various opportunities. But with this peace, it has brought together two persons, and it has broken down that barrier.
Exactly, it's broken down the barrier. Over to you, SHITTU FOWORA. Given you have been following up these recent developments for a while, could you say, or could you equally rate the system of governance with relations to other countries on the African continent?
Basically, Ethiopia has been one of the pearls, or will I say, one of the limelights of the continent, where we've seen transformational leadership, as ABBEYTAKOR has mentioned, where we've seen developmental strides in terms of infrastructure. We've seen the Grant Renaissance Dam, which is transformative of the economy. A lot of persons had doubted that such project of such magnitude will come to life, but it came to life. So in terms of governance, Ethiopia has maintained a system that is the envy of many other African countries. Some say that the inclusivity of governance, where all parties are involved in governance, is helpful for Ethiopia. However, the crux of the matter for which the TPLF have continued to raise arms against the states is partly said to be, that feeling of non-inclusion. For me, having fought a war to win peace, I would say that it's an impressive thing. Having allowed or agreed to ensure that peace returns to the country, to the northern part of the country, it's a good feat. However, I think strongly that the interference from Eritrea is something that must stop, because every country has its own sovereignty, and then when you have countries, deploying troops without following the protocols allowed for such, then it becomes problematic, because sometimes you can have a war extending to another country because of poor management of such wars or such crises.
Staying with you, looking back at how African leaders merged together to see how they could participate in restoring peace in Ethiopia's northern Tigrayan region, how or what role can they play when it comes to resolving crises in other parts of Africa?
Yeah, so essentially, when it comes to finding peace, we use models from others, to ensure that what has worked for some can be replicated. Because you see, when there's a breakdown of law and order, it's discordant tunes. It's people are in disarray. Investments will be on a pause, if not even derailed. The economies also will be affected. So a few lessons we've learned from the resolution of this crisis is that peace is actually an option. It's in fact the best and the only option, because without it you cannot have the needed FDIs, the needed HDIs, the needed investments and the needed support that you will get from the Committee of Nations. Because you see, nobody wants to go to a country where there's uncertainty, or where there are two leaders at the same time, or where explosions could kick off at any time, essentially because of lack of security or lack of trust by people within the system.
Exactly, which is what the people of Tigray are trying to revoke in that part of the continent. And now over to you, Mr. ABBEYTAKOR. What measures, having observed the African continent as a whole and at a general perspective, what measures do you think the government of Ethiopia can put in place to make sure that this peace process they are moving towards actually stays and remains unshakable?
All right. Thank you so much again for your question. Now, I really encourage the government of Ethiopia to continue with their inclusive governance, inclusive style of governance. That's bringing all parties, bringing everyone on decks, on the same platform to reason together, because it has been shown in leadership that when various parties reason in the same light on a given subject, it is very likable for a common ground to be established that leads to progress. So I will really encourage them to continue with this inclusive nature, bring everybody together on the same page, and just make them to reason together and establish various links, partnerships to see to it that the peace is reinstated and is sustainable.
Okay.
So we're talking about sustainable peace and inclusive leadership. Shittu, having listened to what Mr. ABBEYTAKOR says, he requests that the government of Ethiopia brings together inclusive leadership to make sure that the peace process, which they have so much been waiting for, actually remains in the territory of Ethiopia. Now, what do you think is the way forward for this country, the East African nation?
I think strongly that the recommendations and resolutions have been, agreed on, both in South Africa and in
Kenya,
Nairobi, should be stuck to, because you see, for this much to have been achieved, it means that the terms of agreement, the points of agreement between both parties, have been clearly highlighted, and I hope that the government of Ethiopia will not go against, the agreement he has already signed. I also hope that, there will be quick intervention in terms of food supply for people to even be able to hope. People need food for them to be able to rise on a daily basis, to accept that, they can hope for the better. But if there's no food, there's no medical help and assistance, then it becomes problematic because, they can't manufacture drugs, medications, they can't. They need to feed well, in order to get by on a daily basis.
Thank you immensely, Shittu, FOWORA, and ABBEYTAKOR. I think we're done for this first topic on today's edition of Talking Point. We shall take a brief break and we shall come back to actually bring up the second topic, which we shall be discussing this afternoon in order to close today's topic of discussion. We shall be right back.